but I wanted it to be like, okay, today's a sad day and tomorrow I'm going to be fine. And I realized over time that that's not it, that this grief and incredible joy and delight were going to be an intermingling part of my life. And I would, instead of, having this like separation, I had to learn to let them dance together in a way. And that's something that has definitely been something that's been helpful for me as far as perspective, both in dealing with my own grief, as well as extending kindnesses and thoughts for others that are going through things, because there is that thing where we kind of want it to be a light switch. We want to be like, okay, we had our time and everything's better now. But it does take some people longer than others to get through those darker days.
Hey there, I'm Amy Connell. Welcome to Graced Health, the podcast for women who want simple and grace-filled ways to take care of themselves and enjoy a little chocolate in the process. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. Today's conversation is for grievers and people who are walking with grievers. My guest, Heidi Paulec, has just released a beautiful book chronicling the stories of 4 generations of a family after losing a loved one unexpectedly. I'm honored to have this conversation and encourage you to just sit in the discomfort with us, because these are uncomfortable conversations. Because unfortunately, chances are you have experienced this grief or know someone who has. Heidi Paulec is an author and speaker with 15 years teaching experience. She holds a bachelor's degree from John Brown University and holds certificates of distinction on apologetics and why suffering. This was a particularly meaningful conversation to me, as Heidi and I have been friends since we were juniors in high school, which was also the time that she unexpectedly lost her cousin, Jamie. We recorded this conversation a few months ago, and when I pulled it up to edit it, I was really surprised to hear a different tone in my own voice. You may too. I went in with a lot of anticipation and reverence to Heidi's story, but I also quickly found the same comfort we had with each other 25 years ago. We spent a lot of time together on our dance team. And despite the hard stuff, we also share a lot of fun memories. Now, before we get into Heidi, I want to remind you of the resources page over at gracedhealth.com/resources. Whether you're looking for fitness or food or faith-based support, I have you covered. You'll find a 14-day devotional, on-the-go protein-powered breakfasts, how to enjoy shame-free health by breaking 8 rules, and my latest workout offering, squat-free, strong legs. All of these are free. They are just there to serve you. Again, those are at gracedhealth.com/resources. Okay, let's bring on Heidi. Heidi, welcome to Graced Health.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
I don't know the right word to use. I've been anticipating this, and I know it's such a heavy subject. So, and you know that as well.
Absolutely.
One thing that I would like to let our listeners know is you and I go way, way back.
Yes, I love this.
Do you want to tell everybody how we know each other?
Sure, I'd love to. We actually went to high school together. And
yes,
even better than that, because we went to a very large high school, we were on the same dance team together. And so we got to know each other in some really, fun and unique and sweaty ways.
Yes, we did. And I have to tell you, those are some of my predominant memories of high school, especially because I don't know if you remember this or not, but I moved to that high school in the middle of my sophomore year.
Yes.
So I came in not having people. I needed friends and I needed people. And this dance team became my people. And I love, I feel like you and I have kind of just crossed paths throughout our
Yeah.
lives. Do you remember the time that we saw each other at the Methodist
Yes.
Fitness Center?
Yes.
Okay, so that weekend I was getting my very first group fitness certification. That's what I was
Yes.
doing there.
Yes. Yeah. I remember that. That was, yeah. And you've stayed with your certifications and I let mine lapse, but I'm so proud of you.
Well, just seasons, right? I mean, I think
Yes.
God had different things for us to do. So that there
Absolutely.
is no
Absolutely.
shame in that. No
No,
shame in
absolutely.
that.
That was good.
Yeah. We could probably share a lot of really fun
Mhm.
stories about that time, but I know that that's not why we're here. So you have recently written a book called Abiding Light in the Shadow of Your Absence. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because I have been reading it. It is unique. It is
Mhm.
beautiful. And
Mhm.
I can't wait for this to be out there in the world. So tell us a little bit about it.
Okay. Um, the book is really, it's for grievers and those who are walking with grievers. I'm going to start there because oftentimes if I open the door right up and tell you exactly what it's about, people want to run away. So unless they've experienced this, and I want to encourage your listeners to stick with us, it is an
Yeah.
uncomfortable and difficult topic, but there is just such beauty that comes from ashes. And God is so good and faithful. And so that's where I wanted to let everyone know to begin with that it is really focused on grievers. And initially, I got the idea to write it in college. So it was many, many years ago. And it was probably more for me and for our family to begin with. Like I didn't really have a vision that it was going to be something appealing to anyone else. And it took me many years to write because what I did is I collected various family members, actually 4 different generations perspectives of losing a loved one to death by suicide. And the person that we lost was my cousin who was 7 weeks older than I am. His name is Jamie. And he and I were raised like almost like twins in Wyoming with our families on big farm and just had a really full outdoor childhood. But throughout his life, he was a very driven person. And he also had big dreams and faced some early devastations that ended up, I would say, in some depression that we didn't realize was as deep as it was. And eventually, when we were 17, he took his own life. And so our family, like I said, 4 generations have shared their perspectives, and I translated all that into the first person. And they each have from our great grandparents. We had great grandparents alive at the time. Our both sets of grandparents were alive, and I should tell you that our moms are sisters and our dads are brothers. So hence why we have so many family members that can speak into this so well. But so really, it was probably initially for me the focus was, how is this loss unique? Because I've had family members that lost siblings, that lost their own children to death, but this was a different kind of death, a death that dealt with some pretty heavy hopelessness. And here I was at 17 going, I don't know, how do we move forward through this? So I think initially it was really for me to just, this was a really first deep grief. And so for me, I think it was that, okay, this is something that we go through. And growing up in a Christian home and Christian families on both sides of the family, I knew the concept of rejoicing with those who rejoice and grieve with those who grieve, but I didn't really get it until I knew what grief really was. And I didn't really face that, I think, until Jamie's death. And his death was a very sudden, very difficult, multi-layered death that we all dealt with differently. But still, the prevailing theme, I think that's beautiful throughout their perspectives, as well as some binding that goes through the book, is the faithfulness of God and the goodness of God and God's patience with us and with one another as we walk through grief. So I know that's a little different. Most people want like a 30-second, hey, tell us what your book's about. But I've started out with this a little bit more lengthy to begin with intentionally, because it is I think grief of any kind causes us a jar in pace. And it causes us to think, like, how do we pause and how do we enter this very awkward, if you're walking alongside someone, it's an awkward space for you. If you're the one grieving, it's very painful and it's very difficult. And just like any other wound, how do we allow someone to get close to that? Recognizing that, if we would go to a doctor, if we have something, my daughter had an issue this week where we had to be in the ER, and, you have to allow someone with expertise and to come close to that wound in order to help heal. And so we have that, but also through the body of Christ, God has given us just a really unique way in which we get to come together, come close, even if we don't have expertise in that area, whether it's grief in general or grief that is grieving a suicide.
Well, I could really sense that throughout the whole book, just the strong, strong faith of everyone, and through their stories, and really, it was quite astounding. And I know that they had the benefit of hindsight. They weren't interviewed by you a month later, so they did have that benefit. But that was really amazing to see, because that would be a really hard thing sometimes. Mm-hmm. And you share a little bit about that, which we can get into if you want or not, but about how that was challenging from some of the family members' faith perspectives. One of the things that really struck me was the vulnerability of not only everyone you interviewed, and like you said, four generations, but particularly those who were elder, your great grandparents, your grandparents, because this generation I view as pull up your bootstraps, just buckle up and go, don't worry about it. And I'm wondering if you have any, do you think that was maybe related to their faith? Do you think that was related to time? I mean, talk to me a little bit about that, because that was a really surprising element of your story.
Yes. Well, first I'll share that years ago, I read a book by Frederick Buechner. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but he actually walked through a loss by suicide to his own father. And this was early in the 1900s. And their family didn't even have a funeral because it was such a shameful thing, that the practice of even walking through grief in that way. And this is the generation that my grandparents grew up in, where if there was someone that they passed away by suicide, it was generally hidden in some fashion or not grieved properly, in a lot of ways. So it's an excellent question, Amy, because they really did face that. And they also faced their own, here they are, they're walking through a loss themselves, and they're watching their kids or grandkids going through this loss. And I think one of the things that was very unique, both of the grandfathers, World War II vets, military trained, definitely stoic, more so, and yet very close walk with the Lord, both of them. And one is still living, actually, and one of them has already gone to be with Jesus. But both of them had a very strong walk with the Lord. And I think that it became very obvious in the middle of the very heavy grief that this was something that they were going to be willing to talk to their family about. And over time, like when I first approached them about, would you be willing to let me have this information to share publicly? There was no hesitation. In fact, two of my grandparents actually wrote out a great deal amount themselves that I then used for the interviews, but several parts of it are their own words, because they recognized the need to be able to have a conversation, a constructive conversation around grief that's really hard, particularly one that is by suicide. So yeah, they were not hesitant at all, which I was a little bit surprised about. But I think it was partly also because we conducted the interviews in their homes.
I can see why that would make a big difference.
So I do think that probably helped.
Yeah. I can see that. Well, I so admire I don't even know if you had a vision for this, except for just part of your grieving process. But to me, it's part of God's overall purpose and plan for you, right? Is to capture this, because had you waited, I mean, it's been almost 25 years now. Had you waited, you would have lost the voice of so many family members.
Yes. No, well, initially, like I said, the knowing that I needed to write something came very early. The structure of the book actually came in a dream when I was at a leadership conference in college. And it was one of those things where I woke up in the middle of the night and I got in the shadow of your absence. It was very clear. It was as if it was like written. So knowing that that would be part of the title was something that came early. And the structure of having the family members speak in the first person came very early. And so from there, as I was walking through, the process of that was a lot. Because what we did is we conducted interviews. I transcribed, because this was back before all the technology of where it would be super easy today. I transcribed these by hand back in the day. So interviews, transcribed, then written in the first person. Then I submitted all those back to family members so they could sign off on them. Like, yes, it sounds like my voice, sounds like something I would say, but I did it in a prose fashion. So that was the lengthy focus part. And for a long time, I thought that's all the book was going to be. But I was always praying alongside, like it didn't feel finished. It didn't feel like that was going to be the finished package. And so I, over the years, just continued to pray, continued to journal my own thoughts. And in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Little Women, how initially at some point, Jo, wrote this great story, but it wasn't her story. And she was kind of urged to go back and write your story. And I think that that's kind of what ended up happening, is that the Lord helped me work out my own grief and my own understanding through these marvelous, incredible conversations with family members when I wasn't maybe quite ready to deal with some of those emotions that were deep within me. I was able to do that slowly through this process. And then only about, I don't know, maybe 2018 or something like that, the concept of the table of contents came to me. And throughout which is actually dusk to dusk, basically. So it's a Hebrew day. And then all along just my own faith journey, the Psalms of Ascent have played a really strong role. I'm not exactly sure which pastor. I wish I could attribute to the person who initially showed it to me, because I just absolutely, and the Psalms of Ascent are Psalms 120 through 134. And just absolutely, if you don't know the story, I will give the very abridged layman's version, but if you are interested, people should really look up the history behind the Psalms of Ascent, because they're beautiful. And they were utilized by the Hebrews, the Israelites, as they would go back to Jerusalem for the festivals every year, out of obedience to celebrate God's faithfulness and goodness, among other things, depending on the festival. They were prepared for that celebration by going up, because Jerusalem is up a very big hill. And they would go through these Psalms as a point of reference to just what they've been through and where they're going. And sometimes that included lament. Sometimes that included, great questions and frustrations with God and one another. And yet by the time they got up to Jerusalem for that festival, their hearts had been prepared for the glory that God was preparing to share and allow them to celebrate together. And so for me, those Psalms have played a role in my personal life. And it just seemed like at some point a couple of years ago, the Lord kind of weaved those things together and kind of helped me piece the rest of the book together. So
that's beautiful. I have learned about the Psalms of the Ascent in the past, and I kind of forgot about it, to be honest. So thank you for that reminder.
Yes.
Okay. So like we kind of talked about in the beginning, you and I have been friends since high school. And the timing of this, Heidi, is really ironic because I have a junior in high school. You have a junior in high school. And this happened. Jamie died when both of you were juniors in high school.
Yes.
And particularly through this pandemic, I know I have seen so many different areas of mental health professionals saying, we are going to really experience an uptick now and later in depression, in death by suicide, and which is really, really scary. A lot of my moms are like you and I. We have teens, we have kids who have been vulnerable. They have, all the things, right? I don't need to go into all of that. And when I reflect on your experience and what you went through, I wish, it's funny, I was telling my husband, I said, I wish I could go back and have the empathy that I have now as a 46-year-old, because I look back and I think I was not a good friend. I just feel like I really, I just lacked empathy. I remember saying saying shortly after he died, something about, just being dramatic, right? Because that's what 17-year-old girls do. Oh, I could have killed myself. And then just your face. And it was, I remember my heart dropping. So anyway, that was probably more
Yes.
this is not about me, but,
No.
but
Yes. Yeah.
we have kids this age.
Yes.
And so, and I think we're going to have to, unfortunately, expect children to be affected by this more. So how can we help our teens? How can we help our young adults deal with it when their friends are, dying by suicide or sinking into a deep depression? I mean, I know you're not a counselor. I know you're not a mental health professional. This is your own personal experience.
Yes.
But I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I think that first of all, if our young people are dealing with friends that are slipping into a place where it's clear that they're maybe isolating themselves more, I think one thing that is a little bit more known now than even when we were younger is self-harm. Self-harm, I think, is something that in the schools, young people are introduced to these warning signs, and I think that there's some of those things. So our young people know when their friends are in some of those places. And I think that one of the things is just really encouraging them that we want to be advocates for strengthening that mental health and doing it prior to it being too late. And so I think it's incredibly important that young people don't have the tools, nor should we expect them to be the ones to carry that. But if they are recognizing it, they're on the front lines of seeing some of these things, then they need to know that there are trusted adults that want to be part of this solution that may take some time. But it is important to tell school counselors, to tell teachers, to tell parents. And parents, if our kids come to us and they're concerned about a friend, we might have to have some uncomfortable conversations with their friends' parents, because it's better to go to that space and be uncomfortable for a little while. And because it's an act of love, a proactive point of entering that, rather than, you'd rather do that on that side of it than have to show up at their funeral, and I'm not saying that every case is that way, but I think we have to treat some of those things. If our kids are concerned about their friends, then we enter into that proactively. It's uncomfortable, just like these conversations are not fun, but they're necessary. And then in the realm of actually walking through grief with someone, whether it's a death by suicide or another one, it is generally uncomfortable for all of us. One's grieving don't want to maybe display the emotion that is that's coming up that they can't help. And those walking through it don't know what to do. And so it's like, how do we respond to this? And I think the way we can encourage our children, our students, as well as one another, is the expectation that it will be uncomfortable. God actually created life to not have this abrupt end that the fallen world has caused. So in our space, it's a fallen world and we have death. We have something to look forward to in eternal life, which is beautiful, but there is a separation point. And because we have to deal with the separation point, it is really, really uncomfortable for everyone. And some traditions have better ways of entering that space, or at least it's more traditional. And so it's like, okay, this is the expected thing to do. In ours, we have such a melting pot, we don't really know. So to me, number one is it's going to be awkward and it's going to be uncomfortable, but to be a loving friend through that process, first of all, teaching our kids to pray and be responsive, because sometimes we're a part of an inner circle that we're going to be called to walk this path for a long time. Sometimes it's just going to be a little while. It might be a note 3 weeks after the death that we just send and say, you're on my heart. It might be something where we actually are teaching our kids to have those hard conversations little by little with their friends as they walk through these things. I actually had to do that with one of our children. He's endured his own personal loss to a boss that passed away from cancer. But he also, when he was in 8th grade, one of his close buddies, his father died very suddenly. And so being able to not put too much pressure, because as we walk through any grief, we're not the savior for it. And we can't fast forward the process, which is a temptation because none of us want it to linger. But for some, it lingers longer than others. But just being able to be available to have conversations, or to, even just mention the person's name from time to time. Hey, I remember when your dad did this, or, these kinds of things mean a lot to the survivors. And again, it is reading people, because there are times when, they need the space to also begin living their life again. And so being able to kind of tell, I think if you know someone well enough and like you responded to me, like you see a reaction on my face back then. Okay, maybe this isn't the time for, this kind of thing or whatever, but there may be other times where they need something light and they need someone to say, hey, let's go for a walk, or let's go to a movie, or it's like, we're not even going to have a conversation about it, but we're going to be together. And I'm just going to let you know, I love you, whatever spectrum we're on today.
Well, and that reminds me of the stories Holly shared about Jamie's friend. I think it was his friend picking her up and taking her to go get Sonic, and just something so simple, but that was, I don't know what the right word is, sacred space, beautiful space, a space for them to just kind of have that intertwining of normalcy,
yes,
and honoring of Jamie.
Yes. So, yeah, exactly. And Holly is Jamie's youngest sibling. There were 3 kids in the family. So it was Jamie, Michael, and Holly. And Holly was 6 years younger than Jamie. So she was only 11 when he passed away.
Yeah. One of the things I just found very interesting, and I'm wondering, I understand how it is when you start working on a manuscript and you kind of get in the weeds and you may not be able to see things. But one thing, you laugh like you look like you know what I'm going to say.
No, but
one thing that was really interesting to me is I feel like almost every person you interviewed, and I apologize, I don't know how many it was off the top of my head, but like 10-ish,
12-ish, I think.
12.
Yes.
Okay. Almost every single person made a comment about the sodas people brought and the tissue. Did you notice this?
Yes. Yes.
But you know what? From the outside, I mean, for people listening,
yes,
I feel like what an applicable way to bless someone.
Yes.
That doesn't require, I mean, if you're uncomfortable, but it's just a way. I mean, and they also mentioned, several people mentioned the tissues, like Kleenex.
Yes.
And, I don't know that would, I mean, people are always bringing like casseroles or whatever, right? But like sodas.
Yes.
And how meaningful that was, that almost all 12 people mentioned that.
Yes, exactly. It was, I think it's one of those things that, particularly that first week of any kind of grief, it's so abrupt, it's so intrusive, that all the normal things of life, just normal preparations, going to the grocery store, all of these things are completely interrupted. But then it's like, what small things would be helpful? And because they knew that there was going to be a house full of teenagers, they brought like flats of soda. And the garage, because it was in Colorado, so they were all cold by just leaving them in the garage. But it was one of those things that, yes, there were cans of soda everywhere. But it was a small thing that really was a point of connection and hospitality, where this is Jamie's home. I mean, everybody was coming to the family's home, and there was such a sense of hospitality that really God provided. It was God providing the space for the hospitality to be there. And, my aunt and uncle were very hospitable people. So it wasn't like they, would be out of the ordinary. Obviously people felt welcome to come. But I think that the reality is that when you have something like this, the communal effort to make hospitality happen is paramount. And oftentimes in the awkwardness of grief, people are like, oh, maybe I won't enter that space, or I don't want to bother them. And if we have a real heavy sense that maybe they need this private time, then leaving it on the doorstep is great. You don't even have to leave a note if you don't want to. It's one of those things that I think in general, it blesses people to know who did those things. But I think sometimes there are people that are like, I feel like I need to do something, but they don't know what to do. And so just leaving an anonymous, stack of Sam's Kleenex is incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I just thought that was, that was really interesting. Okay. So the next part in our story, yours and mine, Heidi.
Yes.
Is Jamie died in January 1992 when we were juniors.
Yes.
And at the same time, you and I were on this dance team, and we were madly preparing for our national competition in Orlando, Florida.
Yes.
So he passed, and I know you spent some time up in Colorado and then came back. And I mean, I think it was like mid-February. Is that,
Yes.
I really don't remember the
It
dates,
was
but it was
so
like,
fast. Yes.
it was in like a month later.
Yeah.
And, you are such a joyful and a bubbly person, and you had fun. I mean, you were just a really fun friend to have. And I kind of want to go into some of the memories that I have there, but
what happened in the locker room stays in the locker room.
Well, most notably, you and our coach walking out at dawn going, that was when Good Morning Vietnam had just come out. And you were like, Good Morning, Orlando. So, and of course we're all like, well, shut up, we're not sleeping. But that was a wonderful trip. And we placed fourth, by the way, just for people knowing.
Yeah.
We rocked it, just in case people are wondering.
Yes.
But
exactly.
But we had we really did have a great trip. And I remember later, I don't remember maybe this was a month later after those nationals. And again, Jamie's death was still so fresh. I remember you saying, we would have so much fun, and then I would go in the shower and sob because I was having fun and Jamie wasn't there to have fun. And I also picked up from many of your family members who were saying the same thing, like, is it okay to laugh? Is it okay to have fun?
Yes.
So talk us through that conflicting emotions that people have.
Yes. Well, first on my end, I will tell you that the Lord knew that I needed that trip, even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done to go from coming back from the funeral to going back to school, which in and of itself was very difficult. I've always been a very driven student, or I was a driven student. I guess I'm still kind of a student, but
you're still,
student of life. But then I was a very driven student. Focus was never a problem. But when I came back and grief was so fresh, I would go to classes and feel like I didn't even know how to function. I couldn't think. I could barely listen. Everything felt like it was either slow motion or fast forward. And to be able to come in and have our intense practices and rehearsals was huge. And that was actually a huge point for me, is my body remembered. There was muscle memory in what we were doing. And it was incredibly important that I got back into what life was in that rigorous way, even though my mind and emotions hadn't caught up yet. And so that trip actually provided me a gate to recognizing that I was still living. And I had the opportunity to go and kind of be away from the heaviness, because neither one of my parents went on the trip, although they had talked about it and thought about it. They really felt like it was probably best for me to have that opportunity with the team. And so it was a very special and important time in my life, because it unlocked the reality that I was still living. And yet I was living and I was having fun. I mean, I was having genuine fun with everyone. And it was such a release and such a welcome, joy to be able to be present with the team like we were. But at the same time, if I had moments alone, like the shower, it was very much all of a sudden it would come back to me that, yes, I'm dealing with something really heavy. And when I go home, I'm going to have to deal with it again. And that was actually something my mom also said, that she noticed that when I came back, that the heaviness seemed to come very quickly. But as far as long term, I think it's one of those things that we learn to deal with grief and life. And it's the intermingling of those things. I think for me as a young person having such an extreme loss, I wanted it to be one or the other. And I think that there's, to some degree, this happens with adults too, but I wanted it to be like, okay, today's a sad day and tomorrow I'm going to be fine. And I realized over time that that's not it, that this grief and incredible joy and delight were going to be an intermingling part of my life. And I would, instead of, having this like separation, I had to learn to let them dance together in a way, for lack of better terminology. And that's something that has definitely been something that's been helpful for me as far as perspective, both in dealing with my own grief, as well as extending, kindnesses and thoughts for others that are going through things, because there is that thing where we kind of want it to be a light switch. We want to be like, okay, we had our time and everything's better now. But it just it does take some people longer than others to get through those darker days, and being able to be just to go back to the question on laughter and fun, I have walked through grief with others that would not have been welcome. And that is within the last like 10 to 15 years where I've gone through this with other people, and the humor may not have been part of their family upbringing. The timing, it took them a very, very long time. In our family, humor was definitely part of life. And so particularly, Michael is still to this day, he will crack jokes that if most people heard them, they would be like, do you have any respect for your brother? and we tease him about it. But it's like, no, it's like, this is a way he copes and has coped. And it's a fun thing that we get it. We get it's an uncomfortable way of moving forward. But I think as far as like, if we're going to extend that to other people, we definitely have to be reading them. Because I have walked through some things where other people maybe tried to be funny too early and they weren't ready. So, it's kind of, you have to know your people and see what they're ready for.
Well, and it makes me wonder if we just need to let the person who is grieving take the lead on that.
Yes.
And if they're
Excellent point.
laugh with them.
Yes.
And then if they express remorse, say that's, the word I wrote down when you were talking a second ago was coexist.
Yes.
And you say intermingling, like these can be both in the same, it's that both and concept.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really good to know. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about your path to healing. You have, even when you were talking about growing up in Wyoming, a full outdoor childhood, moving your body has always been, of course, there's a gap, right? Like you and I were not in contact for a while, but it seems like moving your body has always been a part of you.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about your healing process.
Mm-hmm.
If moving, how it contributed, how it did, and being outside as well.
Yes, for sure. First and foremost, I would say being outside, fresh air is a huge thing and always has been for me. I think you probably know the science behind it. I don't, but I know that for me, I think it's one of those things that everyone, to get a little fresh air every day it's incredibly helpful. But for me, it has been both something I've done in solitude, where I've gone and tried to find places and, do discovery. Like, actually, that's one of the things that Jamie and I did growing up. Is our grandparents had a very large farm, and we would roam all over the place and, go on adventures. And so I still will do that to this day, not necessarily for grief, but for other reasons. But as far as movement, yes, I have, as soon as I came back from, the funeral, there's been 3 times where my body has stopped me. And that was for bed rest for children. So other than that, I have, continued to maintain movement. And I think that, for me, that has been, it's just that whole mind, body, soul, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And to me, that is one element of learning to love others better and to get real with some of my own vulnerability, is to go to some of those physical, not extremes all the time now that I'm in my 40s, but like I liked it when I was younger.
You said that. Yes. That is very true. No, I literally wrote a book on that. This is good to hear.
Yes, but I do like the push, because to me, I think there's so many life lessons, which we learned when we were on dance team together. We had such an incredible coach who would also bring life lessons into it for us, and help us walk those things out. But I think that personal movement has, in particular, finding those edges, recognizing the need for rest, recognizing the need of, I am really drained today, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, whatever it is, I am drained, and being okay with that, and being able to look at myself and go, okay, in this draining, I'm tempted today to completely isolate, or I'm tempted to numb in another way. What can I do today? I'm going to reach out to a friend who can get this, or I'm going to reach out to a friend who may not get it at all, and we're not going to talk about it, but at least I'm getting out of the house today. So I think sometimes in our own personal responsibility for our own grief, or whatever it is that we're going through that's difficult, I think just our getting everything into balance, the body plays such a huge role in that. And there is such refreshment in being in God's creation. He made it that way. I can't explain all the mysteries behind that, but it is part of what he orchestrated for us, and we receive so much. In fact, I can't remember the scripture right now. I should have written this one down, but there's a scripture that talks about how we get basically like general revelation is from creation and specific revelation is from the scriptures, and how the Spirit lays those things out for us. So, and I will have to look that up. But that's part of, he actually speaks to us that way. And so for me, both of those things have been very, very important in the healing process. And it's not, I think part of it is the idea of coming to a completion when it comes to grief or difficult times. Okay, we're going to look at it linearly and we're going to cross the finish line. And in certain cases, it's a lifelong discipline. It's a lifelong delight to be able to challenge ourselves, be challenged, receive those challenges, not just to be like, okay, I'm tough, or, whatever the gold star we're looking for, but we're being equipped to pour out compassion to others. And I think that's a really, really important part of it, is we want to be physically at a capacity to serve others. And so for me, like at this point in my life, movement is, I hope that I'm able to have the endurance and perseverance to serve the people I'm called to serve well.
Yes, I am sure you will. And I know that your parents have been very active as well. So I think You've got good genes for that. Oh gosh. Talk a little bit about the last year, as we've been under quarantine and pandemic. And I know you're a homeschooling mom, and then you had other kids come back home and, all of that. So, one thing that you had communicated with me is how you really had to change your pace in your production I assume what you meant of this manuscript or of this book, and never quitting. So tell us a little bit about that, about how you found the margin, how you found the space, because that's hard.
Yes. Yes, it is. There's a couple things that have been helpful for me along life's way, and it was utilized within the last year also, is that with my family that live in my house, I have a particular hat that if I'm writing and I have the hat on, then they know it's like intensity. So it doesn't matter what room I'm in, if they're looking for me or whatever, and I'm not responding or something, unless there's emergency calls. So I understand that. But if they peek in and see the hat on, then they know to kind of let me be and let me finish something. So that's been nice, is like, sometimes I think we have to create some little like spaces where, okay, yeah, exactly. For ourselves, and for one another. And since we homeschooled, one of the things that we did years ago is that my kids actually wore uniforms for homeschooling, so that they would know when school time was on, and then they would put on play clothes when it's like, regular family time. And I think that's part of it for me too, is like finding spaces where I was able to focus here. For me, 4:30 in the morning is one of my best times of really focus. I feel like I get about, I don't know, if I tried to write the same thing that I wrote this morning, this afternoon at 2:00, it would probably take me 5 or 6 hours, and my mind would be all over the place. Whereas 4:30 in the morning, I am focused. It comes out quickly. The one thing when in the writing in the space of grief is that I also had to learn that I needed about an hour to re-enter my family in some fashion. So a lot of times, again, here's where a fresh air walk would be nice. We can take the dog for a walk, or I can go by myself. That gives me time to decompress after focusing on something that was very difficult. Yeah. And scheduling time is making sure, I literally write every day. So that is something that has been a commitment, whether I'm writing on this topic or something else. It's really staying committed to those things because they are important. Now, whether or not I get in 30 minutes, 3 pages, or whatever it might be, it differs.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do you like to write? Do you use your computer or spiral notebook?
Yes.
Pen and hand. Right.
Yeah, I'm handwriting. I'm a handwriting girl still. Whenever I translate it all over to a computer, that's one step in my editing process. But I handwrite everything first.
I think that there's something really powerful in that. I don't do that, but I've been writing out my prayers lately.
Yes.
And that has been a new experience for me. So I hope I keep on it.
Yes.
Okay. So speaking of, I have 2 more,
okay.
I have 2 more questions. One of them is kind of within the realm of this, but I'm going to table that because I want to get to the other one that I ask my guests, which is I have this fascination with tattoos. I don't know why, but I do. And I think that people really put a lot of thought into body art when they do it. And I think it can be they oftentimes have great stories. So I was wondering if you had any tattoos, what is it? And tell us a story about it. And if you didn't, but you had to get one.
Okay.
What would it be and where would it go?
Oh, okay. I don't have one yet. I'm not promising I won't ever have one. Sorry, Mom. No. No.
I like that answer. I like that
answer. But so let's see. If I were going to get one, I really love the ichthus fish. And since I'm in Florida now, so it's like the prayer fish, you know what I'm talking about? And so I it's simple. I like that. And or an anchor. I like anchors too. Again, I guess that's from being down here. And where would I put it? I don't know. Probably a wrist.
Yeah. That's what, it's funny. I had a guest recently push back. She was, well, first she was like, you don't know what you would put on and where you would, where it would go. And I was like, I don't, this is why I ask people. I think it's fascinating, but I think I would probably end up on the wrist as well if I had to. And then one of the other things that I thought you did so masterfully throughout the book was you interwove scripture and quotes from other book or from other authors or pieces of writing that I had never, a lot of them, I was able to see it in a different light than maybe I had originally read it because I haven't been through the same experiences as you. So I was wondering if from any of those, or maybe if there's a different one, if you have a meaningful Bible verse that you would like to share with our listeners.
I think one of the really core meaningful Bible verses that and I can't remember where it is exactly right now. It's in Job. And I believe that my great grandparents made reference to it, but it was asking former generations about where they've been. And that was a core part of the reason why I did the perspectives. And so that is one that whenever I think of the book, it has been with me from the very beginning. And then there's another one, I believe it's both in Samuel, 2 Samuel, and in the Psalms, where this is a very personal one to me because it talks about, I believe it was a David Psalm, where he is calling out to God and he is feeling overwhelmed. And God hears and he comes down in this thunderous entrance and he, swoops him up out of the water. And he does this because he delights in him. So there's this rescue. And so for me personally, that was a scripture that was incredibly meaningful as far as like recognizing that my grief was not going to swallow me up, that the hopelessness that was there was not going to continue as far as for our family. But as far as more recently, I think one thing that as I've worked through the book and it's no longer like an idea stage, like it said, it's out there and we're preparing for it to fly. Psalm 50, 1-2 says, "The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth." And for me, that struggle of, 25 years of dealing with grief and feeling this call to share this in a work that is hopefully a resource for others, to bring families around a table to have hard conversations or fellowships, groups of people that will love one another well through these dark nights. It has just been 100% clear to me of God's goodness and his faithfulness, and he shines forth.
Yeah. Amen. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Heidi, you have written such a gorgeous a book that covers such heaviness, but also has such light. And listeners, I really want to encourage you, if you have been impacted by sudden death, if you have loved ones or you have friends who are dealing with grief from death by suicide, please go get it. We'll have the links in the show notes where you can go get it. But it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think it's like I can't think of a good example or analogy, but it was worth the wait. 25 years is a long time. But
Yeah.
I think it came through in God's perfect timing.
Yes,
For
I
sure.
agree.
So congratulations.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your faithful friendship. And it's such a joy to be able to, to come full circle. And I appreciate you being there and you were there for me more than you realized during that time. So thank you.
I give such honor and respect to Heidi and her entire family for sharing their story. Thank you all. These are hard conversations, uncomfortable for some, but they give us such a gift in telling them. If you know someone who would be blessed by Heidi and her family's story, you can get the ebook of Abiding Light in the Shadow of Your Absence on Amazon now, and the hardcover comes out August 31st. I will have a link in the show notes. You can also connect with Heidi on Instagram and Facebook. I will have those links in the show notes as well. And I think you'll find her Instagram stories in particular, which I think she posts automatically to Facebook, but they are very poetic and introspective and just are like a little blessing throughout the day. So go connect with Heidi over on Instagram. Don't forget to check out the goodies over at gracedhealth.com/resources. And if you find value in this show, would you give a little blessing of a $5 virtual cup of coffee? I have a lot of back-end costs associated with producing this podcast and the content on my website and socials. It's all free to you. I'm so glad I can do that, but it's not free to me. Any one-time or monthly support you can give is greatly appreciated. You can just go to buymeacoffee.com/Amy Connell, and I'll put the link in the show notes. And if that's not in your budget, no worries. Just share an episode to your friend, particularly a friend who has been affected by death by suicide. That is also really helpful. And even better, it serves someone else. Okay, what's the one simple thing I want you to remember? This is something I try and do in all of my episodes. This is something Heidi alluded to, but I also captured this from her book, and that is there's no one right way to grieve. Whether you're going through it or you're walking through it, just walk right by someone else, God has given us raw emotions and ways of expressing that. No matter how those manifest, He is there with you. He will rescue you and never forsake you. Okay, that's all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.